CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you from the CHEK News World Christmas headquarters in Victoria as we round out the year with our final show of 2023. This week we are dusting off the crystal ball to cast ahead to 2024, give you some insight into what the parties will be doing as everyone prepares for that big date in 10 months, the October 19th provincial election. So, to do that, we are going to bring in the pod squad, Jillian Oliver, BC Green strategist extraordinaire, Allie Blades from MASH Strategies, and Jeff Ferrier from Frame Point Strategies. Hello to you all. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Feliz Navidad. What am I missing? Festivus. Merry Festivus.
Happy Yalda to the Persian folks.
Right. And the longest day of the year, solstice, was yesterday, Thursday, I believe. So that's a good turning point as we head into the longest year of our four-year election cycle, the actual year of the election, 10 months from now. Put another way, that is roughly 435,000 minutes, 7,200 hours, 302 days. The clock is ticking, and we are going to break down that by breaking it up a little bit, starting with, let's just go around and talk about some kind of overarching goals here as the parties start the year. And then we'll go into maybe the BC budget and look at the rest of the year. But you've all worked on campaigns and behind the scenes. So where do you think the different political parties and leaders want to be as we flip the calendar here to January 2024? And where are they actually? And how is that disconnect? Allie, let's start with you on that.
So where do they want to be? I think the BC Conservatives want to be at a fundraising level on par with the others, with their competition. This is going to be a big one. I don't want anyone to really dismiss this, because without the resources, you're very limited in a provincial campaign. You could probably get away with it, like I think they did in the by-election on the island where they came in second place. That's a lot of grassroots mobilization. The entire province really came into that by-election. That's not really going to be possible with a provincial campaign. So a lot of resources. The only thing that they could probably do better than anyone else is that they could get out there and door knock sooner than anyone, because, well, if you're the NDP, a lot of your candidates who are returning back on the ballot, they're going to be in the legislature in Victoria during the spring. And that the same goes for BC United, where a lot of the BC Conservative candidates are out and about in the community. So the best thing they could do for free, which is really all they can with a very limited fundraising, is door knock as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. And what about the NDP, Allie? Like where are they, do you think?
Well, they just can't make a mistake. That's the thing with the NDP. No big scandal. And that really wasn't the case this week with Adrian Dix and BC United coming out strong against him for renting out one of our hospitals while people are waiting in agony in the hallways. But if they can avoid any more scandals like this that make them look really bad in the voters' eyes, then I think that they'd be okay. I mean, the fundraising's going well. I would love to know who their candidates are, but they're not announcing that. And just ride into the election, no problem. I would hope, though, that they don't call it early and keep to their word for October.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure that that's the plan, but, I think John Horgan... Yeah, John Horgan left a number of legacies here, and one is the now lack of confidence in that fixed election date, because his snap election now leads to speculation. Everyone wants to do that, including David Eby. Jeff, the political parties, where they should be, Allie made some good points there, where they actually are. What's your view of it?
Well, at the highest level, the Premier and the government want to be aggressive, advancing legislation and progressing regulation and getting investment out the doors and into communities on the perennial three problems of British Columbia: affordability, housing affordability, and healthcare. I saw Adrian Dix doing some good work this week on announcing Burnaby Hospital moving forward, Richmond Hospital moving forward, and a big new research facility at the St. Paul's redeveloped site. So that's good stuff. So, but also saw the Premier acknowledging in interviews the need to do better on cancer care. which is a challenge for the government. They're going to need to, be aggressive. They need to want to be the party of action. They want to go into the election as yes, we've got problems. Yes, we've got challenges, but you can count on us to take action, get things done, and work for you. Even if things aren't where they need to be, we're the ones doing you can count on to do the work for people. For the opposition parties, the imperative is for one of the two parties on the right to establish themselves as the clear alternative to the NDP, so that when you go into the vote in October, voters have a clear sense in their mind of who's the party best positioned to replace the NDP for folks who want to shift in government. So we're going to continue to see this spectacle of BC United and BC Conservatives fighting each other, even more than they're holding the government to account. And we're going to continue to see them pushing each other further to the right through the year as they jockey for position and try and establish that advantage with voters.
Jillian, anything stand out for you on the positions of the different parties right now?
I think the government, the governing party, the NDP, would like to show a little bit more momentum in terms of actually getting results on some of their policies. As Jeff said, they've been making a lot of announcements, and we've talked about it a lot on the show. A lot of these things are going to take time, longer than 10 months to really have an impact. But I think that they'd be a lot happier starting to see a little bit of tangible movement and impact on some of these policies, so that they're not facing questions of, okay, we're spending all this money, what do we really have to show for it? But I think, as Ali said, they're in a really strong position. The worst thing they could do is make a big mistake. We haven't seen that from them yet. This might be the longest we've ever gone in BC without a major political scandal. And I think these days that counts for a lot. I think for the Conservatives, Ali also makes a good point. Fundraising is critical. They've got a lot of candidates to nominate. If they don't nominate close to a full slate, they start to look like they're not, gunning for that second place, really. And also opens them up to a lot of liability if they're not able to adequately vet those candidates. I think the Conservatives, having candidates who've got, really out there social media statements, those sorts of things, could really turn the tide in terms of their popularity with voters from where they are right now, and that's the biggest risk, and is hard. It takes a lot of time and resources to do proper candidate vetting, especially these days. I think for BC United and the Greens, it's similar. They really need to refine and focus what they're offering voters so that they can be really, really clear to break through the noise. It's so tough to break through right now. I think people are really, focused on their day-to-day lives. People do tend to tune in more and make a conscious, effort to look at what the offerings are during an election period. But that's not a lot of runway for them to see the movement that they need to really gain more seats. So they need to get really focused on what they're selling voters and be really clear about communicating that in the new year.
Jillian, staying with you, what about the issue of renewal? And should we be expecting MLAs to be clear after Christmas if they're running again? What if some veteran cabinet ministers aren't? Names that are out there, people like Selena Robinson and Harry Baines and Mike Farnworth who've been around a while. Do they want to run again? And if they don't, does the Premier keep them in cabinet? Should there be a cabinet shuffle? Does BC United benefit from having some MLAs? I know Dan Ashton and Jordan Sturdy have announced they're not running again, but those are ridings that could, especially West Vancouver Sea to Sky, they could flip without the incumbent there, the BC Greens being so close. So, the issue of both renewal, new candidates, the impact on government, the impact on other parties, and having to backstop ridings, what do you make of that?
I think it really depends on which party we're talking about. I think the NDP being in such a strong position where they're polling, double any other party can afford to go a little bit longer. The Premier certainly doesn't seem like he wants to do a cabinet shuffle. I think he's much more, it takes time for ministers to pick up a new portfolio and kind of get momentum with it. And I think the government seems much more focused on getting as much done as possible in the time they have left. So I would be surprised to see that even if we do see some folks say they're not running again. But I think, NDP has time, and that's why we haven't seen a lot of candidate announcements from them. for BC United, they have been nominating a lot of candidates, and I think that really shows the crunch that they're feeling. And yeah, I think they could really stand to nominate some new, fresh faces, some younger faces, some more diverse faces in those ridings. So for them, I think it's almost a good thing if they see some folks not running again, because they really do need that renewal to help them tell the story. We've talked on the show about how much of a positive impact for them Eleanor Sturco's had after winning her by-election. And I think it just shows how valuable bringing in new energy is. And I think, to Falcon's credit, one of the most positive things he's done is really focused on candidate recruitment, and you're starting to see some strong candidates coming from them. For the Greens too, they've been doing the same thing. They want to have as much runway as possible to get those local campaigns up and running. The biggest issue for them is always viability. So the more visible their local campaigns are, the more people hear from them knocking on doors, seeing them out at community events, just getting to know that name recognition of those candidates, the more viable they look. So it's even more critical for them as well.
Mm-hmm. Allie, what do you think of the cabinet shuffle idea? And Jillian has raised a lot of good points about, the revitalization that comes when you have new candidates for BC United. Seems valuable, seems like something Falcon's focused on. But when you lose an incumbent, do you also run the potential of kind of putting some of those ridings inadvertently in play as well for especially the kind of vote split that the polls suggest might be happening?
No, absolutely not. I think that it's time for renewal on many fronts in provincial politics, specifically with the BC United. Think about the name change, think about the branding change, new leader. It's absolutely time to bring in some fresh faces. What I've noticed about the BC United candidate recruitment process has been that these are a lot of former city councillors. So that's like a big get, because they're already in the political world, so they understand and they know how to campaign. And some really impressive resumes. Why I want to know, like going back to the NDP, and I love actually harping on this because it's important. Why I think the NDP failing to show their candidates, despite them having the long runway, as Jillian mentioned, that they don't really need to, is that we end up getting these candidates like Ravi Parmar and on the island, right, where he was kind of just like a backroom NDP staffer who's always kind of worked in politics his entire career. What else did you have to offer? And so that's why I want to know who they're actually running. Are we going to get a lot of Ravis where their chief of staffs and EAs are going to get a bunch of promotions? And that's who our candidates are, rather than people who have been business owners, who have worked out there in the community, who have those impressive resumes. This is not a character assassination against any of these fine people who work there. That's hard work. It's rather, do you have the experience to take us out of the tough and challenges that we have in the province right now?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Although I will note, I think John Horgan and Christy Clark were longtime political staffers who sort of, and political junkies, for lack of the better word, that end up becoming premiers. Sometimes that path leads to good premiers too, as well. But it is a good point. Jeff, what do you make of, first off, would you have a cabinet shuffle if you were the premier? And I think, Jillian makes a good point that it takes so much time to bring a new set of cabinet ministers up to speed for a premier who's moving so quickly and wants things to happen. That might not make sense. But also, in the past, the idea is if you're not running again and you don't have skin in the game, you shouldn't be sitting at the cabinet table making the decisions for your colleagues who are running again, because you're not taking that into account. So what do you make of that, the plus and minus there?
So a comment, and then I'm going to help people at home make some money. Okay.
Oh, good. All right. I'm going to write this down.
By responding to your question. Okay. The comment is that Ravi Parmar is an outstanding member of the Legislative Assembly. He was the chair of the school board and is doing a great job, and he's going to be handily reelected in the next election because he's a great community MLA and he's going to do great things. We're going to make money in two ways. The first is bet against a cabinet shuffle. If you got friends who, if the folks said, "Oh, there's going to be a early election." If you watch the show, I said there's not going to be an early election. If you had bet on that, you would have made some money. Bet against a cabinet shuffle, because there's two schools of thought. You've pointed them out. Replace people retiring to focus on folks who are running, or stay the course to keep up the momentum and get things done. What do we know about David Eby? He's really focused on action. He's really focused on getting things done. He's got an imperative to show progress on big, challenging issues. And if you start changing cabinet ministers, you start changing senior staff in the runway before an election, when you're trying to get things done, you're going to gum things up. Things are going to slow down. You're not going to be able to make progress. That's the last thing that he wants before an election. So no cabinet shuffle, no cabinet shuffle. So bet against it. The second thing, I've heard some speculation about some folks in cabinet who may or may not be reoffering in the next election. Well, I had an interesting conversation with a cabinet minister who is often in these conversations about who's running and who's not running at the NDP convention. And this person took me aside and said, if anyone speculates that I'm not running again in the next election, you let them know that I'm running again. I'm running again. And this is a person, yet anyone want to guess who this cabinet minister was who had this conversation with me? First of all, it's noteworthy that a cabinet minister would talk with me.
David Eby.
It was David Eby is running again.
Okay.
Mike Farnworth.
Okay.
Mike
all
Farnworth
right.
told me that he's running again in the next provincial election. So, Mayor of Surrey, I'm sorry, but good news for the folks of Port Coquitlam and Ralph Sultan. Look out, because your record is longest serving MLA age-wise at risk. Mike
At
Farnworth.
risk. The only thing about the cabinet shuffle, and I agree with everybody that it doesn't fit with David Eby's speed, but you do also use cabinet positions to elevate MLAs and ridings you want to hold that are going to be up for grabs as well. And I think there is the potential, especially in this backbench of Langley and Chilliwack and places like that, where you could be elevating some folks up to give them more profile. But I agree with you. I don't think that there will be a cabinet shuffle. Let's talk about the budget, which is sort of the big, we're not going to speculate too far into the future next year because it's hard to do that, but we will give our thoughts on the budget because it's a pre-election budget. They are always wondrous things filled with sparkles and magic and money and all the goodies you could possibly imagine. What do we think the NDP needs to deliver in this pre-election budget? We know BC Builds is going to be part of it, this building of housing. What do they need to avoid? And are people going to pay a lot of attention to the budget? Or we're in a different year in the sense that the election is going to be in the fall. And usually we have that budget and launch right into a spring election in the past. So, Allie, what do you think?
Well, one, it's a pre-election budget. So you mention a lot of things, but your commitment to actually execute on it is kind of a gray area because they're going to be campaigning. So the first sign of the campaign is going to be on February 22nd when the budget comes out. One of the things that I think they're going to struggle in translating is something that actually between the BC United, BC Conservatives, pretty much everybody in opposition is talking about, and that's the Clean BC scandal or issue, and that's that we're going to get a $28 billion setback if we implement these Clean BC policies by the timeline that the government wants, essentially. So with that setback, this is like 24 industries that are impacted. We're talking about mining, we're forestry, agriculture. This could mean that some mills close for good. And so I think from that, that's the problem. From that, the budget's really going to have an answer of how are we going to make up from that $28 billion? That's billion dollars. How are we going to make up for it? And then the other big part of the conversation in the budget is we have a lot of projects that are coming to an end that have employed a lot of people. We're talking about LNG, wood fibers getting up, but it's not too much. So we don't have a roadmap for anything new. So then what is that new? I'm not saying that it has to be a major industry, but we don't have a roadmap for anything new in the way of big employment. And I appreciate that we're going to be building homes, but that is not the same.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we somehow link, BC Hydro's new private power call and windmills and stuff across the province to job. I don't know. I mean, it's possible.
That could very well be it.
Yeah, it's possible. And you're right. There are a lot of traditional industries. We saw 300 people lose their jobs in the island in a mine that closed just before Christmas that are suffering, and some big completed projects that are finishing too. So the jobs plan for sure. Jillian, just what do you think we should be looking for in the budget?
Yeah, well, first I just want to say that figure that Ali pointed out, that's from a report from the BC Business Council, which I think, it only takes into account sort of our past economic activity and doesn't look at any of the future opportunities that the government is looking into coming out of transitioning to the clean economy. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of mill closures and decline in forestry industry jobs far long before Clean BC. And I think, we've seen a big battery plant announced in the Fraser Valley, lots of opportunities the government's looking into for mining because of all the metals that we need for clean tech. I think that there is a plan there. The government needs to do more, but I think, there is a lot of opportunities coming out of the clean economy, and I think that figure is probably overblown. I think the most interesting thing about the budget is just going to be the level of ambition. It's a really interesting time where we have so much need to make progress on so many files, but we're also experiencing a tighter fiscal situation. I think the extent to what the global economy is slowing down in the new year is going to have an impact, and I'm sure the government is watching for signs of that very carefully. Where interest rates going to go, because that's going to have a huge impact on housing starts and how the government is able to sort of get that moving with all of their new plans to build so much. So it's going to be really interesting to see if we're going to see more spending, if they're kind of comfortable with the level of deficit that they're at right now. And then I think, the final thing that I'm really going to be watching for is are we going to see any big ideas on affordability. The government's kind of, shown a lot of its cards for its plan on housing. We're going to see BC builds like you mentioned, Rob, but we're also going to be looking to see if there's anything for the sort of basic pocketbook affordability that the government's going to come forward. The big one that governments often go for is some kind of rebate, some kind of check. Those are really expensive and tend to not have a lot of impact. And, if we're still seeing some inflation, can actually make matters worse. So it's going to be really interesting to see. We know the government's looking for something like that. It'll be interesting to see if they've come up with anything between now and the budget.
Yeah, or affordability measures tied to income levels that don't help a lot of middle class people as well. Jeff, you only have 30 seconds, 20 seconds on the budget. Hit us with your thoughts.
Everything in the budget is important, but the only thing that matters electorally is David Eby going to go big on building housing and government building the housing. And that's what I'm looking to see in the budget. That's what I expect will be there. And he's going to say, we can't depend on the private sector all by itself to try and solve the problem all by itself. Government needs to play a role, and there's going to be a big debate between the government and the opposition parties on that, and it's going to be defining and how we in the debate that happens between now and the election.
Okay, great. Thank you to the panel for all your insights in 2023, and looking forward to getting through the election period with you next year as well. Thank you for watching and subscribing. We'll be back in a few weeks in kind of mid-January with all the latest here in BC politics on Political Capital.